Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Welcome. Today I'm speaking with Cora Beitel, who is a midwife on the west coast of Canada. I want to let you know that there are a few periods of time throughout this episode where our connection wasn't 100%, so things may sound a little muddled. If you want to watch this episode on my website to see the content that you may have missed through the audio file alone, please visit www.babyready.info, and it's all there in the baby event. Welcome, Cora.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad we were able to coordinate everything. Can you tell us a little bit about what your professional role is? And I think maybe from two perspectives, not just perhaps as a member of the community, but also what on earth is a midwife? Because everyone who doesn't know for sure what a midwife is has a very different idea of what midwives do.
Absolutely. So I'm a midwife. I work at the Strathcona Midwifery Collective in Musqueam unceded land and for 10 years. And we serve a really diverse population, but some of the specific communities that we care for in midwifery is trans and queer families, as well as sanctuary clients. So that's folks who have precarious immigration status and who don't have medical insurance. And those are sort of two of the significant communities that we care for at Strathcona, as well as everyone who is, wanting to have a midwife as their care provider during their pregnancy. And a midwife specifically, so basically when someone is pregnant and they're looking for a care provider, they have a choice between having a midwife, a family doctor, work as independent providers for people during their pregnancy. So that would be a medical care provider who would take care of someone throughout the entire pregnancy, birth, and so that means that someone would come to see us for ultrasounds and blood work and make sure that they're staying well throughout their pregnancy, and if any concerns come up, coordinate the care that they need for that, and then also do lots of education around preparing for the birth and preparing for parenting. And then as midwives, we often work. So in BC, we work typically in teams. And so people would see a few different midwives throughout the duration of their pregnancy. And then whichever midwife was working that day when they went into labor would be the person who is then with them throughout the labor. We work in hospital and at home. So people can give birth at home, or we don't really have kind of established birth centers in BC. That's something that we hope to have one day. But so typically people are choosing to birth in home or in the hospital. And then so we're with them throughout their birth, and then we're caring for them and the baby afterwards for 6 weeks, and typically doing home visits for the first week, and then people will come back into the clinic for after the first week for the remainder of their prenatal visits. And then after that, we typically discharge their care back to their family doctor. So it's a really holistic, inclusive kind of care that is that really kind of follows people in the community, in their home, to the hospital. So we really work in different sites in that way, which really provides that kind of full wraparound care that people are often looking for when they're growing their family.
Excellent.
Yeah, and as well as a midwife, my midwife is sort of my main professional role, but I also work as a community organizer and as an educator. I run groups out of the clinic. So since 2015, we've been running the Trans and Queer Pregnancy and Parenting Group, which started off in person, has more recently been online, but in the fall we'll go back to a combo of in-person and online, and that's a community group for people who are either in the planning, pregnancy, or new parenting stages of life, and specifically for trans and queer folks. And so that's been a really lovely place where people gather and share resources and stories and support each other, and just have their journey seen and celebrated. So that's been a really lovely space to be facilitating with a couple other people who help me with that. And then I also do lots of education as well, with our interdisciplinary with our colleagues, so midwifery, nursing, physician colleagues, really kind of expanding the information that's out there on inclusive and accessible care for queer and trans folks. Yeah, and I'm a parent. I have 3 kids.
And when you have a few minutes, you're a parent, right? You've got a full plate. Oh my gosh. Can I ask you, you've brought up a couple of other questions that deviate from the list I was planning to follow. But first, the group that you're doing when it's online, because the reality is that I'm in Ontario, you're out in BC, and there's a lot of Canada around us. If other people are participating in this show and are interested because they can't find a group in their own community, is it something that you've kept local, that it's online for locals only, or does it far reach that if somebody in Newfoundland wants to participate and factors in the time change, that they could participate as well?
Absolutely, they can. And that's actually been one of the benefits of going online that we didn't immediately anticipate when everything went online through the pandemic, is that our group, which used to be local and be located at the midwifery clinic, now there were people who were able to join from all over. So we have people from kind of all around North America who joined the group, and so that's been a really lovely piece, and adds in a level of accessibility that online groups has really demonstrated the need for. Noticed that we lost parents of slightly older kids. So people who are joining the group now tend to have like infants up to like 1 year old. Whereas when we were in person, we would have people who would come with their like 2, 3, 4-year-old, because it allows a bit of like a play date, a way for the kids to come and play together while the adults are getting the kind of community connection that they need. But for those folks staring at their computer for a couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon is not really what works for their family. And so those folks didn't remain with the group as much when we went online, but then we were able to open up to people in different geographic locations. So that's why our intention in the fall is to alternate between the two, hopefully to be able to really widen the circle of who we're able to welcome into that space.
Oh, that's fantastic. And we had a couple of pauses technically when you were speaking before, and you're talking about midwifery care and attending births in hospital. And I just want to sort of revisit, just in case there are people who aren't familiar with midwifery care. When you go to hospital with one of your clients and they request an epidural, because there is some preconceived ideas that if someone's birthing with a midwife, that they can't have a medicated birth, they can't have an epidural or nitrous oxide, they can't have an induction or anything else. Do you have and I recognize perhaps it's different from province to province. I know how it is here. I assume it's the same there, but can you just touch on that briefly to give people a bit of an idea?
Absolutely. So it is actually really different from province to province. And, there are certain jurisdictions where if you need an epidural or if you need an induction, then it's a full transfer of care, and the midwives are no longer caring for you, where it's really quite different in BC. So we're fully integrated into our hospitals, which means that our clients have access to nursing care as well. So I know in certain places you have 2 midwives who come to the hospital, and that sort of second midwife is taking on the role that the nurse would otherwise have. Where in BC, that's not the case. So in BC, a client who is in labor, who is arriving at the hospital, who has a midwife as their primary care provider, they have access to everything that a client who has a family doctor as their primary care provider or an OB as their primary care provider. They have access to all of the same things within the hospital, and they're assigned a nurse who is caring for them along with their midwife. And so our clients can have any of the pain relief that they're needing. They can, have an induction or an augment of labor to kind of help give stronger contractions if that's needed. And they don't lose their midwives. And in fact, there are midwives, I'm one of them, who can actually order induction. So I have kind of upgraded some of my skills so that I can order oxytocin for an induction or an augment. So we actually don't even need to have a physician who's actually signing off on that. That's part of my scope. So there's, our scope is really quite broad in that way. And then we even care for people who are planning a booked C-section, because there's a benefit to having midwifery care throughout the pregnancy. The midwives are there for the cesarean section. Obviously, it's the obstetrician who's doing the surgery at that point, and then care is transferred back to the midwives for the postpartum care, which is really a specific kind of postpartum care that follows someone in home and then in clinic. And so it's we are also even seeing that clients who have to have an OB for their care are choosing to have midwifery care just for the postpartum. So that's something we can also provide as well. Wow. Is postpartum only care.
Okay.
So there's our scope is really broadening, which I think is just so important, because it allows people who have different needs to access our care in different ways. And it's not limited to a very specific picture of, who you have to be and what kind of care you're looking for. It can really just broaden to say that, midwifery care is important for families, regardless of how they're needing to birth or choosing to feed their babies, or, the whole range is really benefited by midwifery care.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a huge fan. And so I would tell everybody that they should have a midwife, and probably do. But there are some amazing obstetricians out there, and I certainly don't knock them either. I've had experience with both. I've done a birth with both. So there we go. Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back.
Cuddle your baby in comfort in Moon Mama postpartum underwear, designed to not only keep you comfy, but also feel special. Each pair is hand-dyed, making them unique, just like the person wearing them. Visit us at heymoonmama.com and use code SAMLEESON for 15% off your purchase. That's SAMLEEESON. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at Hey Moon Mama. Stay comfy.
Are there things that you might look for working in the capacity that you do that your clients would argue makes you better suited to work with the 2S LGBTQIA plus community than perhaps heterosexual professionals who work in a similar capacity?
Absolutely. I think it's something that really can't be underestimated, that having care providers who are from within that sort of larger 2S LGBTQIA plus community is really meaningful, because of our shared understanding, language, community experience, ways of awareness of how we build our families, awareness of what's important, that it isn't a one size fits all. And it's really important to have care providers who have that broad perspective of all the ways that as queer folks we build our family, and the different ways that we are needing to be cared for along the way in that journey. And I think that we really do people a disservice when there's sort of this this idea of everyone just needs the same care, and that's not true. We've know from within community conversations that when you're kind of treated as everyone else, what you're really saying is that the dominant narrative should fit for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying really that, that everyone, that the care that white, cis, heterosexual people need fits for everybody. And that's just not the case, because when people are outside of that sort of like dominant structure in society, you have different needs, you're treated differently, you have different life experiences, and having care from someone who can understand that is really meaningful, to be seen and celebrated and have your care reflected back to what your family needs truly are. And some of the things that I really can see that clients have reflected back to me, or that I've experienced myself, is that there can be a few things that happen when you're being cared for by like a well-intentioned person who doesn't have a kind of deeper understanding of the needs within the queer community. You can have like this sort of inappropriate curiosity, so asking intrusive questions that are irrelevant to care. You can have this sort of like overexcitement of having a client from a specific demographic. So had clients come to me who had previous care providers who were just very excited about having like their first trans male client, and was asking them if they could make a film about them, or like kind of putting their identity above their care, and that can just feel incredibly othering. And or that you can have care providers who are then also the other side of worried about being too invasive, and so not knowing how to ask relevant questions about family identity and care needs, and so then that can sort of fall back into that, like, oh, everyone just needs and gets the same care, but not being aware of those specific needs, and not really having your family being fully seen, and having specific care needs being missed, because again, it's kind of coming from that cisgendered heterosexual perspective, in terms of, if this works for us, then this will probably also work for you, but realizing that that's not the case, and that people have specific needs, and our families need to be seen for who they are. And so if you don't ask, if you don't have those open-ended questions where you're not making assumptions about who people are and how they identify and how they want to be treated, if you really have that awareness in terms of how to leave space and how to ask questions, and how to let people tell their story, then you're really going to miss a lot of it. And if you're assuming that your clients sort of fit a certain mold and all have the same needs, then you're actually not going to be providing great care. And so it's not that that cisgender and heterosexual people can't provide good care for queer and trans families, but it's that it takes more work. It means like really learning how to identify what you don't know, how to seek out those resources, how to educate yourself, and how to know how to compensate properly for that education, and be aware of the work that people are putting in to provide those educational opportunities. But it's not something that happens passively. It's something that when you're not part of a community, you really need to learn how to really actively listen in a different way, and not come with your preconceived notions and assumptions of what kind of care people need.
Yeah, that's very true. I was speaking to somebody not too long ago, and we were talking about being treated like the other. And they were actually saying that what bothers them even more is that they've become so accustomed to being treated like the other that they don't always even notice it until after the fact. And I thought, wow, that's a statement right there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, people come and into my care, and they've, had, either whether it's previous experiences in the healthcare system that are related to pregnancy or family building or not, there's oftentimes people describe this sense of like relaxing into that experience of care and feeling like they can let down their guard, and that they don't have to worry about explaining their needs all the time, that there is enough of a shared understanding and shared language around the care and the kind of supports that, even though it's not like all the pieces aren't always there, it's still this ability to relax into that experience in a way that oftentimes people haven't experienced before. And we're so used to like putting on our armor and like having our guard up and being ready to experience moments of discrimination or inappropriate care, that you're just, when you realize you don't have to do that, it can be really emotional, and it can be just really like shift. It can create this shift in terms of the expectations that you have for your care, even after that experience kind of going forward. And I think people do tend to seek out care providers who have, a shared similar identity, because there'll be pieces that they can relax into in that care that then allows for other conversations where it's not, it kind of allows for a deepening of the care that you're going to receive, because you have more of a sense of trust of the provider.
For sure. That makes perfect sense. Are there any pearls of wisdom that you've learned over the years that your clients are especially lucky to learn from you that they might not learn from anyone else?
I think one of the pieces that certainly isn't always, people aren't always aware about in terms of the care when they're planning to grow their family is that, it's not only the gestational parent who can feed their baby and who can feed their baby from their body. And so that's something that sometimes people have heard about, or they're not sure, or they haven't even heard about. Sometimes people are just, excited and surprised to learn that, a non-gestational parent, regardless of the, sex you were assigned at birth, can make milk and can feed their baby from their body. And so that's something that is often, can often be an exciting part of the, parenting journey for different people in that family. And it can be really satisfying to support people to figure out how they want to be involved in parenting in ways that are non-normative and in ways that are expansive. And it can be just really exciting for people to just sort of realize that there's different options, and that their care provider is just outlining that as a perfectly, normal option that is part of the care that's being discussed at a routine prenatal visit. Like, I think people feel really that it really just feels for some families just really exciting and honoring for their parenting experience. Obviously, not everybody wants that, but even just having it be something that's an option that can be discussed, and is often just a really kind of just unexpected part of care for a lot of families.
I love that. And I do love seeing the expression on people's faces when you talk to them about the ability for either parent or both parents to be able to meet the feeding needs of the child. And they get so, first of all, they're thinking, what are you talking about? And then when you explain it further, like, really? It can be so exciting for some. I just love that. It's just love that. So how do people reach out to you? And I understand that, and again, it's probably very different in BC. Here, you find the midwife who sort of covers and services your area, and you contact that practice and you tell them you'd like to go into care. I don't know if it's the same in BC, but so what is the process, I suppose, in BC is my first question. But second to that is then about the group that you were speaking of earlier. How would people find out more about that if that's something that they're interested in?
Absolutely. In terms of midwifery, people, they can look up you can just Google I work, or people could look up on the Midwives Association of BC, there's like a midwife finder.
Mhm.
And so they could just specifically put in my name, Cora Beitel, and they would come to me. And then on our website, there's an intake form. And then people just fill out the intake form. And then if we have room, they get assigned. And if they specifically, because there's different midwives who work in the clinic, but if people specifically are requesting one midwife in particular, as long as there's room, then essentially they get assigned. If as long as they live in our catchment areas.
Right.
So it's a trans and queer pregnancy and parenting group. We have a page and a group on Facebook that people can either like the page or join the group, as long as they are themselves, part of the 2S LGBTQIA community and are on the parenting journey. So it's not a group for, care providers who are wanting to serve folks in the community. It's people who are, from within that specific community. And so people can join the page or the group, and we post, the posters of our groups. But essentially people can also email us at tqpp.group.bc@gmail.com. And if people email, we can put them on our list, which then lets people know of upcoming groups. And then that's how we send out our Zoom links or the location of our group when it's in person. We just had a picnic this weekend, actually. It was our first in-person get together since the beginning of the pandemic. And it was super lovely to be in a park with all the babies and kids and pregnant folks. And it was just really, really nice to these people whose faces you usually see as little squares on your screen.
With their toddlers that run behind them.
Yeah, to see them in person in the park and be sharing a moment like that together was really nice. Go back and forth between being on Zoom and in person. So either through email or through the Facebook page or group is how people would connect with us.
I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to join me today and to talk to everyone and telling us a little bit about what you do and how you work within the birthing world and the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.